Abe, you're all business today.
Am I not normally business?
You're
I'm a businessman.
Business in the front, at the very least. What's the worst haircut you've ever had?
Probably what I wear every day.
Okay, great.
Like I'm constantly in, because I don't think of myself as haircuts. I think of myself as a animal, like a sheep.
Groomed?
I need to, yeah.
No,
I need
you need to wool up.
I know. Well, I need
Sheared?
all of my hair to be eliminated, and then I guess that's a haircut. But then that just grows forever. So every time I get a haircut,
You
it's
let it
fantastic.
go long. Yeah, I do 6. I'm also similar. You're really just a consciousness locked in a haircut.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I do 6 months at least, and the guys are always shocked. Let it get long, then chop it off. That's hair.
I find it makes my hair like a lion's mane. I get comments all the time on how luxurious my locks are.
See, for someone who's all business, you've let me take us pretty far off the rails. Let's get back on track. This is Frame
You're all
Rate,
business
everyone.
today, Mike.
Yeah, I am. Up front and in back. Where we rate frames. I'm Michael Swaim.
I'm Abe Epperson.
Yeah. It's the movie one. And it's not a pick the flick. No thank you, any fan.
Yeah. It's not a pick the flick. We just
This
decided
is
we
our
wanted to
own
talk about it.
indulgence. Yeah.
We haven't talked about it, and it seems like a catastrophe.
Well, it's definitely a big omission. This movie's been on the list since day one. We have a curated list of stuff we'd like to cover. There's plenty on there. City of God, I know, is on there. Love to cover that. But that is not this day. And here to help us talk about 1992's Army of Darkness is our very special guest, John. Oh, we've never conferred on this. Liot?
Oh, Leo.
Leo.
Yeah.
Leo. I don't think I've heard you say your name.
There we go.
When we taped the interview.
It is a constant issue with people not pronouncing my name correctly in the real world. And I always just like to say, well,
I bet.
do you know how to pronounce ballet? And then all of a sudden it makes sense.
Leo. Yeah.
There you go.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Welcome, John.
Thank you so much for having me. It is a genuine pleasure. Can I just add into your conversation at the beginning? My worst haircut. I had a red mohawk for a while. And I shaved it off after a teenager in a Burger King made a cockerel noise at me. And it devastated me so much that I was like, well, this has got to go immediately.
Wow.
So there we go.
The power strangers have.
Oh, devastating.
Well, it's identity based. You're hoping for some kind of reaction from the universe, right? And if that's
100%.
what you get. Yeah.
Well, and the other thing is I'm 6'4", so me with a mohawk, I'm kind of cutting a pretty mean silhouette. And I was just like, the haircut was giving me quite a lot of confidence I didn't naturally have at the time. And everything was going smooth sailing until this person just walked past me and just went, bah! And I was like, well, that's the end of that chapter.
Have you had the thought of trying to find them now?
Oh, and going, love, do you like it? Do you like this?
You changed my life forever.
There is something about the idea of like people who just come into your life for a split second, and yet like I'm still thinking about this person. This was over 10 years ago. Who are they now? Where? Maybe they're dead. You know, like
hopefully,
what happened?
One can dream. Yeah.
Or maybe
all right, Rooster Boy. Where are you now?
That's not your name.
Rotting. I was hoping for an answer like that from Abe, so thank you for that. Yeah, I had bleached, like buzz cut, bleached Eminem, the Eminem cut after Stan or whatever. Mm-hmm. Very embarrassing.
I want to say, I don't feel my answer was weird because I've never not had the same haircut.
No, it wasn't weird.
I've never changed the way in which
just
my hair
wasn't
was
like a slam dunk answer.
Oh, I'm jealous of that though.
That's fair.
To have a haircut that you just go, that's my haircut. I've never had a haircut that felt like this is the John Liot, you know?
Look, I don't think hair matters. So for things that don't matter, I just do path of least resistance. It's also why I wear like 3 outfits. I do
all
at
once.
That
He's very
shit.
hot.
Yeah, very hot all the time.
I did a big transition from no beard to beard, but that's it. Let's talk about the movie. Yeah? Good?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Typically in this show, what we do is we have our guest
talk about
either this movie or their relationship with this movie. Is this the first time you've seen it? Is this seems like a classic?
The millionth time you've seen it? Yeah,
exactly.
Where do you fall in the range?
So not the first time I've seen it, but certainly it had been a while since I'd seen it. Yet it's one of those films that you only need to watch it once for it to like sear into your memory, which I'm sure we'll get into, is not praise to its quality, but is indicative of like what the film represents. I was trying to think, like, the first time I would have seen it, I was young, like young teenager at most. And it would have been, I'd stuck my TV on when I was trying to sleep, like 2 a.m. kind of stuff. And it was just playing. And it felt like I was watching like a fever dream where I didn't understand that things were happening as they were happening. Nothing really made sense, yet it all kind of made this coherent logic. It got me thinking about when the first time I'd seen the Evil Dead original was. And it was when I was 11. I went to go and stay with an aunt and uncle away from my home. And I was like, I love horror films. Show me the scariest horror film. And they showed me Evil Dead, The Exorcist, and The Omen. And I think that fundamentally changed a lot of the way
asked
I relate.
And answered.
I love it.
Yeah. I mean, it was like watching Evil Dead the first time was like, that film gave me nightmares so much. It was so
Exorcist,
intense. The stairs.
Sex with the crucifix. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Well, it's funny because that scene was almost like gone from my mind. You know,
okay.
You know, there's some artistic credibility there. But the stairs, coming down the stairs, I remember that. I think watching that Evil Dead with the smiling and the laughter, that really turned what is scary on its head for me. The idea of like the disconcerting, and then like
they'll swallow your soul.
Well, and that. And just the sheer gore and practical effects. So I always had like quite an affinity to the Evil Dead. Interestingly, had never actually watched Evil Dead 2, but then watched Army of Darkness. So there is this huge disconnect between the first and the third films. But for my own podcast, Crafting Chills, we did an episode on Evil Dead Rise and just how mad this series is that it kind of just jumps through these different genres. So yeah, I suppose that's my relationship to Evil Dead and Army of Darkness specifically.
Fantastic. I'd say that most of our audience, most people who grew up in the 90s have a very similar kind of interaction with it, where it's like it's on the mantelpiece, at least of that, or at least that small mantle that is horror comedy, that then turned into more of a genre in the later years. It's spawned a lot of stuff, at least Evil Dead 2, and then obviously Army of Darkness as kind of the sequel to Evil Dead 2, and I count Evil Dead 1 as kind of the first kind of run of everything, because that one's serious, and then they were like, what if we did this as a comedy, basically? And that's kind of the trajectory of Raimi's career since he made both these films. And
even though 2 is the link, I guess, in theory, there's still a jump from 2 to 3. 3 is, you're like, okay, this is like for kids
Looney
now.
Tunes. This is...
Or like a kid could enjoy this. Well, I was 7 when it came out, and I definitely saw it before I was 10, and I've seen it 1,000 times. It was one of my favorite movies growing up.
Right.
Hence it being on the list from day one. But what about you, Abe?
I mean, I'm kind of similar. You always tended to see some of the off-brand like stuff a little earlier than I did.
Yeah,
like because you had a much cooler pop culture father. But I watched it probably when I was like 12, and probably watched it a million times. It even got a few times on the school pizza party day that you have in public.
Yeah,
school.
Really.
Yeah,
Yoshi bitch.
It would be Army of Darkness, Spaceballs, or Holy Grail. Those are the 3 movies that basically...
No Shrek. We'd get Shrek a lot.
You know, it's a shame.
He'll swallow your soul, by the way.
He does.
Yeah. Okay, great. I mean, I watched this on Laserdisc till the Laserdisc glue started to degrade.
So
yeah.
Wow.
Speaking of which, I looked this up. The top songs the year this movie came out: Red Hot Chili Peppers' "Under the Bridge" and REM's "Man on the Moon." So this, take your mind back.
I mean, and either song could have been fitting for the soundtrack.
Yeah. But I definitely I was shown this one first because I was like old enough first, right? 3, if you're showing them in age appropriate order, 3 would be the first one you get to see. And so to me, it was one of the first things with teeth that I saw.
Yeah.
And it felt like almost, because of the skeletons especially, I thought of it as like an adult skewing Muppet show. Like it really, I really did meet it as like a cartoon. And it's interesting watching it as an adult because of the Three Stooges stuff, obviously. But the horror is even less than I remembered. It's a pretty broad comedy. Like it's not scary really per se. The Deadites mostly do karate is what I really took away this time. Like the fight scenes are punching fight scenes, which was interesting to me, rather than biting or anything kind of horror lane.
And
you
just
know, it's
for
more Power
Rangers. Just a few shots, they're full on humans that are essentially very good with swords.
Yeah, that's right.
I love that they don't even give a shit in this film. They're like, yeah, those guys that's the same guy. That's the same skeleton. It's like, that's clearly a man doing kung fu. And then it cuts to just a guy who's shaking like the crypt keeper and has a sword in his hand. It's so delightful.
I think that's something Raimi shows but you just need moments that you remember. Because the arm connecting with the chainsaw in the pit remains one of the coolest things I've ever seen on film. Like a moment that makes you go, "Oh yeah!" Like,
well, you know what?
It's so good.
The second time watching this, because I watched it just before we jumped on here, and for as deranged as the film is, it's so cool. Like, it's not like accidentally cool. Like, it's obviously trying to hit those points to make it be like, yeah, this is badass. But so many other films could do that and go like, oh, that's awkward or that's like cringy or whatever. But it just nails it. And obviously so much is down to Bruce Campbell just being fantastic.
Painfully handsome too at this age. My God.
Yeah.
Greatest chin in cinema.
I had the same impulse as you did rewatching it, with like kind of looking in under a lens of I have to talk on a podcast later. It's crazy how I find that comedy is really hard when you try to be serious. Like if you're trying to be very cool and then you're also trying like take me seriously, I'm cool, and then you also want to make them laugh. That's hard dismount to kind of do. I mean, some people are amazing and can navigate
Andrew Dice Clay, obviously a legend.
Obviously, we're a bunch of clay heads here. But there's like lines where it's like, that is clearly just a joke. And then there's lines that are like, okay, you're sweating a little bit. And there's a few lines like, good, bad, I'm the guy with the gun. Mm-hmm. Is that a killer line or is that too self-serious? Like,
I think that's a killer
line drawn.
But there's some that do. I think the Sally Forth joke is too kiddie. Like it is repellent to me. Sally Forth. Sally Forth.
And he turns into a pirate just for the last half of the line.
That happens, doesn't it?
But I think everyone cherry picks probably lines that are so like now through 2024 eyes, forcing the kiss on her after she slapped him and the give me some sugar baby seems a little aggressive, where I'm like, who is he, Johnny Bravo? Like it's almost too broad or too like comedically sexist or whatever. But then there's other lines where like good, bad, I'm the guy with the gun, where I'm like, he's still got it. I think everyone differs. Yeah. The poo-poo
it's just
platter
so
lines.
Like I find it's an amazing feat that he can navigate, like that stuff with like the insert comedy. Obviously, is very vaudevillian. Like when his face starts to get seared on the hot pan, and he grabs the spatula and then he shakes it like, this is perfect. If
you know hand acting,
we both love a good insert. Like we think that inserts are like the funniest thing, and it's a criminally underused aspect of a lot of comedic films these days. That's so Looney Tunes. And then also there's moments of legitimate like, oh, he looks like Fabio. This is ridiculous, but also like kind of cool.
First you want to kill me, now you want to kiss me. Blow. One of my favorites. Yeah. But then there's stuff where I think stands up as triumphant because the filmmaking is strong because Sam Raimi knows what he's doing. The triumph and the cool factor feels very real. Like, right, you primitive screwheads, see this? This is my boomstick. Was still very like, it reminds me of Firefly or good Western moments where you're like, oh, the sheriff is in town now. The adult is here. Shop smart, shop S smart. You got that? So good. And it's because of the way it's shot too. Raimi is, I think, has he done? I mean, he did Darkman, but for my money, he's one of the most comic book-like directors. It really reads like a graphic novel visually.
Absolutely. I think that you can draw a direct line to his bag of tricks in this movie and draw it to a lot of the transition stuff that you see in Spider-Man, like the fast edits, the in-camera sudden momentums, the snap zooms, the sped-up footage, literally anything to make live action have the same variable speed as a cartoon, he does. And he doesn't give a shit if it doesn't look great or has a bump in it or makes it look tacky. He's like, no, just get inside the frame, the thing I want with the speed I want. And that is a very comic book impulse because it's all about you have to set the momentum of the reader. You have to set it for them.
Yeah, the clock.
Yeah. Well,
and he'll POV anything. You got Ash, the spikes themselves, the arrow, the deadite. At some point, there's a catapulted bag of gunpowder that gets a POV shot. You're from the bag's POV. Mm-hmm. Sorry, John, you were saying?
I was going to say, the montage scene with the groovy line, which probably the moment from Army of Darkness. And I'm sure there's other influences, but I watched that and I can't not see Edgar Wright in it, like combining the montage and making it funny. And I tried to Google, what was the first use of the gear up montage. I'm sure there's other ones earlier, but it really felt like if you told me that was the first time it was done, like specifically with the zoom and like adding that, because there's the gear up montage in Evil Dead 2, but they're static shots and just including the zoom to each shot just increases the pace, and then you just see how the evolution of that changes, and then to what we have with the perfection of Edgar Wright now. Yeah.
I think the first iteration of it was Don Knotts, actually.
Slapping all his
who's gearing up and he said, "Hail to the king! Hail to the king!
Hail to the king!" The groovy moment always reminded me of two of my favorite comic characters, Scud and Earthworm Jim, which is high praise in terms of vibe, if not creators.
That's a good touchstone.
Yeah. The things that were trying to be cool that I think succeeded. Sonic the Hedgehog is in there for me.
I think a lot of it, and I'm very interested in this era of film and like the anti-hero, I guess, during this. So like basically Ash is Han Solo. He's Rick O'Connell.
He's Indiana Jones. He's
Indiana Jones.
He does the belt whip. He uses his belt as a whip.
I think there's a crucial aspect to the character story-wise that makes him more like that.
He's returning an artifact to its rightful place.
Because he's a hero that isn't there for the same quest or the same reason as everyone else in the film. So he gets to make fun of society as they quest religiously or, for the righteous path. He's like, no, I just want to get home. And so he gets to dismiss the affection of people.
Till he rises
stuff
to
that
the
like Han
occasion,
Solo
of course.
does. Right. And namely the love interest, he's like, he can push her away and shit on her and stuff. And I love that apparently. And I realized like that's all just John Wayne. And then I realized, no, actually John Wayne's just doing Humphrey Bogart. And then it's literally always making Sam Spade. Like, I think that like if you look now at modern Marvel characters and there is a direct line through the ages to Doctor Strange from Humphrey Bogart, and it's just because that archetypal like playboy was a riff. And
see, I think that goes all the way back to it's like the archetypal masculine. It's just the societal ideal of masculine that men play at trying to be. But like it goes back before film. It predates film.
Yeah, but that was always like or that was like Odysseus, like I have the righteous path. I am the knight. I am Or I'm King Arthur. That's the basic one,
Right.
right?
But I bet even cavemen were like, you know how you have some cool traits and some bad traits? Imagine the coolest guy. He's all cool, good stuff. I'm
Like
sure
the
people have been
Lancelot,
doing that.
Who's
Yeah.
fucking your girl. Yeah, I guess it's Lancelot.
He always fucks your girl. He won't stop.
But I just thought that was interesting in that, like, if we really do rehash it, but when they nail it, that's why you remember names like Han Solo and Rick O'Connell, or Ash.
MacGyver, etc.
MacGyver.
I mean, you've got to
ahead.
give attention as well for just like the character design of Ash. Everything from like kind of the
He's so
slick
cool.
back, short hair. I was thinking about it before, like just the blue ripped shirt and like brown khaki pants. Like
Also, his
it's
face scars are perfectly placed.
Yeah, it's
Too
just
perfect.
he's
in
just
fact.
iconic, despite only being in 3 films. Like whereas I was kind of talking to a friend the other day. We just did an episode on The First Omen and talking about how Damien as a character is just like superseded the stretch of those films. There's just something about like the name Damien. You just attach it to a kid with black hair and you go, yeah, that's that. And there's something about that with Ash as well, of just super simple in design, and it just works. It just will always look great in that fit.
Yep. And it's the cowboy look, but
The
it's
brown
like
and blue, the
disheveled
brown
cowboy.
slacks. Yeah.
Yeah, brown slacks. It's like
Chainsaw in the hand.
chainsaw in the hand, just like John Wayne, baby.
Or even calling the gun a boomstick is just like, it's so stupid, but I love it. It's just like
there is truly an art of the cool to this movie. That cannot be,
Well, there's funny because, you're saying before, like Army of Darkness being like such a pivot into just comedy, but I was watching some of the deleted scenes from it before, and it appears that there's like a version of the film that was way more serious, and I just don't understand who that film would have been for, because there's like stretches where it's just normal dialogue, like normal character dialogue. There's no jokes. Ash, like one of the things that I picked up on was Ash can make jokes, the Deadites can make jokes, but the human characters don't make jokes.
The villagers don't understand
they're
what jokes
straight.
are.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So when you've got a scene where it's Ash and the villagers and they're just having a conversation, there's no like bravado in his voice. You're like, I'm kind of lost here. I don't know what you're trying to achieve with this.
It's interesting because sort of looking into the back end of this is the first time I realized Sam Raimi's connection to some of those old action shows like Hercules and Xena. And that makes so much sense to me because Xena, those shows, which I dabbled and dipped into from time to time, they will take ridiculous offers and treat them seriously, just like this. It like almost cartoonish offers, and it has a soap opera aspect. And it made me realize upon viewing that there's some overlap there. Like it's a, daytime action adventure is a genre that I would usually put in low esteem. So it's interesting to me to see elements where I'm like, yeah, this is kind of a Xena-esque vibe. It's like a CW action adventure show at points. And it's the thing that really rises to the surface for me is it's a much drier universe. There's almost no fake, like there's not a lot of bleeding. Compared to Evil Dead 1 and 2. They were originally going to call this Medieval Dead, which I don't know if that's more self-serious or less self-serious, but it went through a bunch of different script versions that I think varied in tone. It's almost, I can imagine almost any group of writers ending up on the comedy version, because if you digest the story over and over, which is essentially what he's done with this franchise, eventually you're going to make fun of it, right? Or comedy is where you land. You got to do the meta-aware version.
That's the Act 3,
yeah.
Absolutely.
I was thinking the first time I was rewatching this, I know like it's completely justified that we shit on studio executives for getting their hands in films and taking the artistic credibility out or making these awful decisions. But I really couldn't help but empathize with the studio who had to front the bill for Army of Darkness and being like, this is weird. Like, I don't think anyone's going to like this. And Sam Raimi kind of going, no, like, here's my spin. Here's how this works. Him and Bruce Campbell, and I think one other person put up like $1 million of their own money to keep it to actually do the reshoots for it, and then it bombed at the box office. So there must have been some CEO X being like, I fucking called this. I told you it wasn't going to work.
Just the absolute faith of Dino De Laurentiis. It's like he just wanted to see these types of films being made, and he didn't see it. That's an amazing setup. It's like a slam dunk for the start of your career. He just made Sam Raimi's career. I mean, he happened to be really talented and justified.
He kept
in
the
cost
going,
but
right.
but it's crazy that he's just like, oh, there's this guy who essentially will go to work for us, and it's pretty amazing. It's something you're saying, Mike, about like how it shares a lot of DNA with a lot of the things you were mentioning, but like I was really taken back by, and we've kind of said this already, just in that like Evil Dead 2 is a comedic iteration of Evil Dead 1, and Army of Darkness is
different,
like off
though.
the rails.
It's not doing the zany Edgar Wright vibe thing.
And this is straight up a Looney Tune. This is vaudeville shit, and like what's amazing is I don't know if we've ever seen that done to this extent. I mean, can you think of a film that is like basically just doing these level of jokes, these comic book, like this
with Halloween
per minute kind of thing
themed?
Because
it does
tough.
Like, I don't know, with some of the costumes it felt like Indiana Jones Halloween special in moment. It was, but you're right, I think of different ways to describe the vibe, and I think that's why it's a cult classic, because it is such a unique vibe. Dusk Till Dawn borders on it sometimes, but I don't think it's trying to. It's just that over the top.
Just over the top.
Tucker and Dale versus Evil is the closest I can think of, but they're rare.
That's like self-examining.
Yeah.
This is just like just like play it straight, almost like a Mel Brooks or a Zucker comedy. Those are the closest things that I can think of.
Yeah.
Because it's like kind of self-parody, but also it takes itself seriously.
But then there's lines like the skeleton saying, "I got a bone to pick with you," and he goes, "Buckle up, bonehead, you're going for a ride," and you're like, okay. It's very cartoony at certain points. I
wonder why. Do you have a opinion on why slapstick comedy just isn't really a thing anymore?
I do think it's in a different... People hurting themselves is still a thing. I know Arrested Development's a while ago, but I immediately thought of the cornballer burning everyone's hand. Like, that would still be slapstick in my mind. I feel like there is physical comedy, but it's definitely not the dominant form of comedy, which it was at a certain time. It's interesting. Comedy has... Because also, like, for example, I recently watched a clip out of curiosity of Lucille Ball doing stand-up. And woof... Like, comedy, it shows you that comedy, because she was a genius, obviously, but comedy changes to a point where what used to be jokes don't sound like anything. You're like, that's just a sentence.
I think comedy is the fastest moving genre, because what is funny gets stale a lot faster than what is scary. What is,
so I would imagine slapstick will come back. I think it comes in waves with that stuff.
I think we are in a state of, we're postmodern babies, and I feel like we should think of the world in trends, but the thing I always come back to movies is that it doesn't move like it used to move, where there's big waves of things that are done because they're interesting to people. Now we have replaced it with like a money-making machine, which is things are done, which are very popular. But like, I think maybe there'll be a slapstick comedy that
breaks through and then gets imitated
of all time,
right? Like Bridesmaids broke through,
but
Barbie.
I think it will always be there. I think it's tough with like the really virtuoso stuff, like the Three Stooges stuff, because that is such a like
or Chaplin Keaton
form, that it's like you can't do it now or anything that looks even remotely like it without having this conversation, like we're having about Evil or Army of Darkness, because it's like it's immediately the thing that is what you talk about. It's vaudeville. It's straight up vaudeville. So it's not its own thing. It's a callback. And I don't think that we'll get ever an era where we have slapstick return, but it also never left,
It never left completely, but there was a time when it was underscored, just like there was a time when minstrel shows were the main,
And I don't know if we'll get a main form in that way. It's interesting because
we're a million niches now.
That's what I think has happened in the last decade or so. We'll see if that holds.
I would love it if, because we've had 2 straight Evil Dead remakes done now.
Right.
And if they just went,
the third one,
we're going to the third one's just an absurd
man,
slapstick.
it's like Scary Movie. Yeah, they always go real one comedy, one for us. One for the fans.
Even the TV show, which is more in tune with like the consistency of this, which is the Ash vs. Evil Dead.
And it was good. That was a good show.
What has the slapstick elements, and it has definitely him like mugging camera
intentionally
and saying
over the top,
like a Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. But they still took itself seriously. They still Deadites are a real threat. This movie, they mostly do hijinks. They mostly are like,
the series actually upped the Deadite realism a little bit.
But you're also mentioning the remakes that are just take comedy out of it, make Deadites as scary as possible.
Yeah.
I think that there's some great craftsmanship in those movies, like the people at the helm actually did some really good horror movies. It has nothing to do with Evil Dead, man. Deadites to me are demons that are Joker demons. That's
they mock
their uniqueness.
You sarcastically.
Yeah, and they try to shit in your brain and fuck with your brain. I actually always thought that anytime a Deadite would do something that was even physical, I was that's just normal demon shit. That's that's The Omen. But
that's what the Deadites in this mostly try to beat you up in a fist fight.
Yeah, it leaves it, but I'm thinking about the pit fights where it's it's straight up Roadrunner,
it's Power Rangers.
Ridiculous. Yeah, it is kind of Power Rangers.
That's such a good comparison.
Yeah, because they're so slow and dumb.
Even the way the car appears at the very first shot of the film is like a Power Rangers explosion when the big robot and monster attacking each other.
That's true. But
explosion,
it gives us our very first POV shot, which almost reminds me of The Office shot that's just seared in my mind and really effective, which is your POV from a knight on horseback looking at him and then looking at the car and looking back at him, and there's guys attacking the car with swords. Very funny shot.
Oh, that shot that's literally the first thing medieval knights do is fight the
car to make sure.
It's so good.
What an opening offer. My name is Ash and I am a slave.
I was going to ask you guys about this. How do you feel about a narration that kind of doesn't make sense to the actual story? Because at what point is he narrating from?
It's a narrative technique that's widely considered hacky, which is, I guess you're wondering how I ended up here. Essentially is what he's doing. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think for me, it's all relative. If the movie doesn't take itself as seriously, then I'm not going to care about what time things are occurring in what order, because we're just here to have some jokes. But if it does take itself seriously, if it does say isn't this a poignant moment, which this movie never does, then I'd be starting to ask those questions.
Very slightly in the moments where he turns good, which are very, very short and quick.
I guess that's true.
In the moment where he's going, no, because Sheila's taken, that's genuine. There's two genuine fleeting moments. Yeah.
And I think those are silly.
True.
Silly to do,
those.
But I want to make
it's a force of habit thing, largely. Yeah. Now we have comedies that are totally soulless, or they're aware that they are disposable. Yeah.
And I don't like that either, because
too nihilistic.
Once again, it's that serious versus funny thing to me, is if you want to be seen as the cool kid at the party who has all the right things to say, you can't be the clown. The clown, the whole point of the clown is you suck, you're a piece of shit.
You're at the bottom of the social pyramid. Yeah.
So that's my thought on that.
Yeah. I remember thinking that about Lord of the Rings, because of my filmmaking rules in my head. Is it okay that it opens with a narration? I really love these movies, but it really bothers me that it opens with a like previously on Lord of the Rings.
Well,
as this also does. Yeah.
It's funny you should describe it as hacky, and I understand where that's coming from. I love exposition dumps because it feels like someone's just telling me a story, and I'm like, I'm a child. Just tell me what's going on.
That's
and
what I'm questioning: is why
recap.
Why is it an illegitimate human experience to just be told a story? I guess the filmmaking wisdom would be because to use the medium to its maximum would be to have visual storytelling involved. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, I think. People who think of rules as things that you have to follow because someone said them, because they're wisdom.
That's me.
Because there may be wisdom in that, but it's just to keep people from telling a story entirely that way or too much, being reliant on it too much, because it can be very easy. So if you do it once and you're just like, let's get these people, it has a function. A lot of people didn't see Evil Dead 2. We're hoping because we have bigger release, they're going to see this and there's going to be a lot of confusion. How do we get around that? Well, let's just rip off the Band-Aid in 4 minutes.
Well, what's ironic is that given how distinct Evil Dead 2 is to Army of Darkness, you could start the film off without that exposition and it really make as much sense. You know, just be like, okay, a guy's fallen from the sky with his car. He's clearly not from this time. And he's confused. True. Off we go.
I think that if this was made in a more modern times, I think you're absolutely right. They would just fucking go for it. But I think it's just how audiences perceive things. They would be like, whoa, what's going on before we start? I need to know all the details.
Hey, now who's this guy?
Why is he like that? Well, doesn't he have a hand? Where's the hand go?
Well, and yet at the same time, I was imagining the people who saw it because they did love Evil Dead 1 and 2. Like some percentage of people watch this, and by the time you get to Sheila asking the knight about her brother's fate while the fucking Crumhorn plays Greensleeves in the background, I feel like if I was an original Evil Dead fan, I'd be like, what the fuck is going on? What is this? Tone? Yeah.
Tone, sir?
If you're an original fan of this series, you've got to go from Evil Dead 1 of this straight horror, and it's like fantastic. And they go, oh, okay, now Evil Dead 2's out. Wait a minute, this is the same film but funny? And then you get to Evil Dead 3, and you can imagine a bunch of fans being like, what is this? I love this.
Evil Dead 1 was the best, and they ruined it.
And your childhood self was right, John. It doesn't make sense. Meaning, like, one of the plot points is then he goes to a windmill to hide from the nothing that from Neverending Story. He breaks a mirror. Little tiny guys come out of the mirror. One goes into him, so he births an evil twin. He shoots it in the face.
I love that this movie chose about 25 minutes in. It's not, though. It's just like it shows you how silly the hero's journey is, because there's all of Act 2 is he does a bunch of stuff that's related to the quest. It can be literally
it can be anything. It doesn't matter.
But like the start of his quest, which usually there is a failure. The first thing that we learn about that quote hero's journey that we've remade billions of times is they go off and they see how insurmountable shit can be. Because they just tooled up, they got a little stronger, but they're gonna need to get more strong. That's just basics story stuff. This movie chose to say his first day at the quest, he went in the woods, got scared of something, ran away to a windmill, and then basically failed in the quest when he gets back at the midpoint. He's just like, guys, I'm sorry, I didn't really do
the words from the day the earth stood still. Yeah,
and everyone's bummed out. I also can't think of a movie that does that. I went there and fucked up and everyone's just let down and that's your midpoint. I think we should do that more. Maybe Kiss Kiss Bang Bang.
Well, like the midpoint is when he sees the 3 books on the pedestal. I was tracking it.
I mean,
yeah. I would say it's his return. Yeah, so.
And I think that's what makes Army of Darkness so endearing, because it's the reluctant hero's journey, but really at no point does he seem like he gives a shit, you know, other than right at the very end when he has to. But just like, yeah, cool, let's lean into a character who really doesn't care. You know, he's not built relationships up with anyone. He keeps taking the piss out of everyone he comes into contact with. And
then even Sheila, the quote unquote real love story, he just goes back to the present. And like the voiceover is literally like, so I left her there.
So I was going to ask, which version did you guys watch then with the ending?
As a kid, I watched the studio version where he goes back to S-Mart, saves a random woman for no reason, and makes out with her.
Yeah. So for this rewatch, because if you were to watch this film right now, not on your own physical media, but to go to Amazon or to YouTube,
It does the S-Mart ending.
It is the theatrical cut, which is the S-Mart cut. It's the 80-minute or 81-minute cut. I grew up on the director's cut because that was the version I had the VHS on. So even though the "Come Get Some," which is a classic line that comes out of the final scene at S-Mart, and of course the probably top tier of all films. Like if you had to say there's one line, probably be "Groovy" or it'd be "Hail to the King, Baby."
King Baby, which is
you
from
can't
that
lose
ending
those,
too.
and that is why that I think that ending
is the true ending,
considered the true ending. But I think the slept too long ending is the better ending. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I think that just because from joke wise, this is throwaway theater, and it's just like, fuck it.
From the past to the future. That. So people are unaware it's that he slept too long. He says the words wrong again, which in in the theatrical release just makes a Deadite follow him through the portal. But in the OG director's cut, it makes him sleep too long, and now it's a post-apocalyptic future. And I just want to mention that they tried to make that movie for a long time, but because this flopped, they wanted to do another one where Ash fights robots in the future.
Yeah, it's Fallout. It's fucking Fallout. That rules.
Yeah.
I'm here for it. That would have been great. That's what they can do for the next new Evil Dead film. It's set up.
Hopefully. Yeah.
And they'll just confuse the canon even more.
I hope they never do it ever again. I just don't think that you can do this iteration of it without Bruce Campbell.
What'd you think of the show? Oh, well, they still had Bruce.
Yeah. I didn't care too much for
could.
the show.
I don't think humans are not replaceable. I bet there's someone out there who matches
There's someone
the vibe.
out there. Yeah, Bruce Campbell type.
Yeah.
But he has to nail.
Or I mean, just
he's
as good in
navigating
an action horror comedy.
the physical comedy, the handsome ruggedness. You know, he's
Brendan
just got
Fraser
so many...
could do this.
Oh,
I don't think he's funny enough, to be honest with you.
Really?
If it's 2000s Frasier, then absolutely.
Even in Mummy era? Interesting.
I mean, Mummy is whimsical. Mummy is charming. Mummy is funny, really.
It is when he yells and then the zombie yells and he runs away.
That's a killer joke. But,
it's Looney Tunes.
They also made Harrison Ford funny in Indiana Jones sometimes because writers and directors are amazing.
But that doesn't have, this has lines with bite to them. Well, hello, Mr. Fancy Pants. I got news. You ain't leading but two things right now, Jack and shit. And Jack left town.
Beautiful.
It's like they're perfect.
I really found that, even though it's the Bruce Campbell show and he dominates the entire film, I don't feel like he says enough, because every time he says something in that tone of voice, there really isn't. And I feel like that's the biggest misstep, is I would just listen to him saying those lines again and again and again. His
quips, it's funny because he has 10 quips that are notable that nerds remember, but he could have had more. I agree with you. He's at Bender levels of throwing out quotable lines.
I thought Bender as well.
100%, yeah.
Especially when he's getting fed grapes.
Yeah.
I know that's like a hedonism bot, but it's actually it's just the way he looks at the world is.
But how little he cares about. He's like, reality is disposable because I'm out of time. Is very Bender. Yeah. And they even do the Ren and Stimpy thing where you suddenly cut to a grotesque close-up, a shot that's seared in my brain forever immediately, is the old lady saying, "Into the pit with those bloodthirsty sons of war," and then biting the bread. You know the shot I'm talking about?
Yeah, and it's the ADR is also makes you... you all know
it's a surreal shot, and it's
a
not,
surreal shot because she's biting the bread while her line is still ending, and it's just one of those things where you're like, that is a notable shot because there's a lot going on. It's a lot
weird with that shot. I also noticed for the first time this time how bad the walla is from the crowd. One of them says, "What fell beast lurks in that pit?" And it's like, you live in the town, you've done this before. And then at the end, the same deal with when they're like scared of the incoming army, they're like, but there's skeletons and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The shout outs are dumber than I realized.
That actually reminds me of something you said, which is this is the first time, because I think it's like my first viewing where I actually just keep the subtitles on, I think. It's been a while since I've watched this film because I OD'd on it and had it memorized. But I watched it mostly on VHS, and I bought the director cut of it on DVD, I think, around then. But there's this line, "What's the matter? Raised in a barn? Shut the door." And then the audio, I never had heard the line. The audio's so low. He says, "Probably raised in a barn with all those other primitives." And that's obviously the joke. Like, he's spelling out the joke there. So my head was always like, that is such a good line, because it makes me think, but he doesn't even need to say it, that the fact that she's a peasant and probably was raised in a barn. But then he spells it out for us, and I was like, oh, wow. The
joke
sound
is
has
broader
been bad.
than you thought.
Yeah, it's broader than I thought, just because the sound is bad.
Well, and
or at least that
I
was
think,
my experience.
I don't know if Army of Darkness wants you to get that deep, but I think there is something to be said about the idea of who Ash is as a character at this point, and essentially a man who's lost his mind, and he's in this situation, so he's making jokes of the situation to be like, that kind of keeps him a little bit sane, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, especially because everything is a joke and then also an aside. Like, he's talking above them. They're NPCs, so to speak.
Yeah, that's exactly the vibe. I feel like it gets underplayed, or I noticed it more this viewing. Raimi's amazing at something the Pixies talk about, which is just loud, quiet, loud. Like, everything feels so impactful because of dynamics, especially on the audio plane. But he plays the action sequences. Like, sometimes score will completely cut out, and it'll do that Saving Private Ryan verite where you hear all the impacts, Gladiator type thing. And then sometimes it'll be full orchestral score with a more choreographed, like, and if you watch it, it's basically sequence by sequence, loud, quiet, loud, quiet, loud. And you can't overestimate the impact of suddenly we're quiet and the human mind, it wakes you up. It wakes you up over and over. It's very effective.
Most basic form of entertainment. It is a roller coaster.
Here's the thing.
It's just up, down, up,
but the
down,
dynamics.
because we love the change.
But
we love the change.
There's this whole branch of filmmaking where they go, well, surely it would be better if it was all up. And it's not. You don't feel it as much.
The Michael Bay
brand
of filmmaking.
Oh, I found the shout out that I made the note of how terrible it is. It's when the skeletons show up, someone says, "That's a sight for sore bones." And I'm like, what are we doing here?
We're just replacing bones with whatever.
Well, when I saw the Scottish skeletons who have beards and play bagpipe bones, I'm like, okay, this goes further than I thought down the cartoon route, further than I remember.
Yeah. Well, and when the skeletons are being brought back to life, a skeleton coughing, that's always quite funny, you know? And
the fact that the skeleton puppets don't have any articulation, like the skeletons getting destroyed by cannonballs are just Halloween skeletons stood up with a guy going, "Oh God!"
Just some guy in a booth.
There's one shot towards the end of the battle where it's just Bruce Campbell right in the middle of the screen, and clearly just people throwing dummies at him.
Skeleton
and he just has to interact like, but like, there is no effort to make it look like they're moving.
It's the one where he breaks one of their backs. And all that dust flies off. Yeah, that's a great shot. It's because what are you gonna do? You might as well embrace it. That's the other thing that I think Raimi can ramp up really well, is that he can take a moment like that and go, this is laughable, and for the most part you want to hide those laughable moments from the filmmaking and expose it in, like, let's say a long shot, like the case we just talked about. The longer that shot goes on, the more the illusion falls apart. And that's his point, though. He's like, I want it to fall apart. It's funny to me that it's falling apart. He knows when to activate that mentality.
It's a little bit like in, say, Team America, when they make a joke about these are puppets. You know, at Pearl Harbor Sucked song, and he just knocks the puppet off with the camera.
Well, I feel like there's a subset of sketch comedy that that became the main joke bucket. And I'm thinking of, if people are familiar with like Channel 101, that Dan Harmon school of, or Rick and Morty, where the vibe is, it's so disposable that we're constantly intentionally making it as shitty as possible.
Yeah.
Tim and Eric, you know, the joke is, look, we intentionally made something bizarre and off-putting that's bad.
Yeah. Like, so it became a running gag in Channel 101, like short films, which was like an online competition in the mid 2000s. They would have a thing where it would just clearly be a door to someone's bedroom in an apartment, but there would be just a piece of paper on the door that said like executive boardroom or missile silo or something like that, because they knew that they couldn't get any location that would even fake it. They didn't care, and that's how we kind of resolved. And that kind of sardonic
low effort
attitude,
chic. Yeah,
kind of took the world by storm, because we kind of said, yeah, it is kind of stupid, but I much rather prefer this, where it's just like,
or
craft
you're right,
the stupid
where it's
moments.
high effort. Yeah,
it's high effort. At least, what are we doing here?
I think there's room in the world for both. Like,
absolutely.
I think Justin Roiland epitomized it with he's like, I don't even try with the dialogue. I just mumble through it. And I got to admit, it's funny. I think it's a funny bit. Yeah.
It definitely is. Yeah, for sure.
He's funny too. Funny guy. Interesting guy. No, I'm sure you've heard he's canceled for
interesting guy.
Legitimate
done a lot
reasons.
Of interesting stuff.
Done interesting stuff, that guy.
I will say, again, having watched this film twice in the last week, I loved the first hour. The first hour, I could watch that every so often.
It's
and
tighter
be like I'm enjoying
than the back half. Yeah.
The last 30 minutes of the battle scene, there are much less jokes. You're in a location for the most amount of time. I think prior to that, it's the windmill scene, and there's so much madness going on in that you kind of forget about it. It, to me, a little bit of a slog towards the end, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, which is interesting because
hour.
The director's cut is like 10 more minutes of that, where it's like,
because they spend money on it, and they wanted it to be an epic showpiece. And that's the thing, is through modern eyes, it's impossible to see that, because you've seen Helm's Deep. This is like playing with a diorama in comparison.
And they also it's also weird because, like we talked about this film being Looney Tunes, like they give a lot of space. Most of that 10 minutes, yes, there's a lot more fighting, but most of it is like, you know, the kings or whatever, like, we gotta fortify this area, and like they're all being very like good at their job. And then at the same time, you have Ash doing it, you have Evil Ash doing it. I had a question for you guys. I'm not the only one who sees the perfect impression of Ricky Gervais in this film, right? Like, that's Ricky Gervais to me. Do you guys know what I'm talking about in this movie?
Evil Ash?
Eric the Red?
Oh, kind of, yeah.
Or Henry the Red?
Henry the Red.
You don't see it? Oh my God, it's as clear as day. Even his teeth. All I'm saying is, next time you watch our...
But do you mean his mannerisms or just his physical?
His physical properties.
Okay, got it.
The human looks like
that.
I
see. I thought you
meant
like
a more
impression.
Swole Ricky Gervais.
I'd take a recut where Henry the Red is David Brent. I mean, that's a film. That's something.
There's something there.
There's
viral quality to that. Yeah, I love it. I don't know. I just had to say that because I feel like I'm going crazy. No one's ever said it online.
You searched?
Yeah. I feel
one thing as well that's just crazy to me is just before the pit bitch fight, you have the guy who gets pushed down into the pit, and a huge fountain of blood that comes out.
Love that.
And that's it for blood. Like, there is no more blood in this film.
The red light gag, the blood is so bright it lights up Ash's face. It's just a great attention to detail thing. But yeah, that's it for blood in this.
And it's just, that's what the series was like. What series? The first two films were really built on was just like, this is blood. Gore to like the nth degree. And it's like, oh wow, here it is. You know, one of the first few shots of the film. There's all that blood, and then it's like, yep, and that's that.
The rest is smashing skeletons to dust. Yeah.
Yeah, you
I
gotta
also-
kind of nerf.
It's not even like any
gore.
ooze or anything, you know?
Right.
No, yeah.
Ichor.
I mean, I guess the closest we get is like the face of
Ash's
evil
face
Ash,
is fucked up.
which is kind of gross.
You
but, like,
Ash.
no
I'm
more than like
Ash.
Goonies, you know, like so
Yeah.
it's not really in the same category. It's because they were trying to do like a more 4-quadrant thing, well, you know, which that's fine.
Although as a screenplay snob, I mean, childhood skews everything, but it's kind of hard for me to imagine. Like Abe and I write screenplays together, and I can't imagine sitting down, or more so, Sam Raimi, who I revere, sitting down and writing in a screenplay. I may be bad, but I feel good. Who rules? You, my lord. Some of the dialogue
Is so dumb.
so dumb to me that I'm actually
I think-
surprised at how dumb
but
it is.
Isn't that just like failed attempts at stuff
Like
that is
buckle up,
actually
bonehead.
funny?
We're going for a ride. It's like, man, that's dumb. Or
Like,
when
I
she
keep-
bounces off a trampoline, one of the Deadites bounces off a trampoline.
I love that shit. Well, I mean, I think the best joke in the entire thing is when Evil Ash's skeleton skull opens up and they play a train whistle before he's launched into space.
Yeah.
But there is
He
a
blows
lot.
his
It's
top.
perfect. It's perfect. He goes there's a joke in here that drives me nuts, which it's so funny, but it's also like it really strains credulity. Like what happened? It's the scene is he just has disembodied Evil Ash's corpse the first time after the brownie sequence,
Dismembered
from-
him. Yeah.
the windmill, and he has him in a bag. And he points at him, and then he just goes, "That'll teach you." And it's such a funny joke to me because of obvious reasons. But also, I'm like, I think sometimes it's that stuff that you're talking about, where you're like, that is such a, like, are they trying to be cool? Like, what's the function of that line? And like thinking about Sam Raimi writing it down, I'm like, man, that's so sweaty. But also, it's because he was going for a good joke. And I think that's true about the other ones. They
Well, and
just
you got
didn't
something
hit.
on your face, and then the dirt comes in is a good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got something.
I like
think
the
that's right.
low key joke that stood out to me this time that I didn't get as a kid because it's sort of just a mundane joke, but I like is when he's suffered because of the 2 fake books and there's only 1 book left, and he goes,
Oh, yeah,
seems
yeah. After the
fairly
second.
obvious. Like proud of himself for figuring it out. Seems fairly
Oh,
obvious.
I thought you were gonna go with the why. I forget what it is
Oh,
specifically,
you.
but the second. I'll
Yeah.
get to you later.
Well,
or
that's
whatever it
it's a great Bugs Bunny style performance for sure.
exactly.
But I like the seems fairly obvious.
I think that's one of the things that works so well with Ash as a character as well is you have these moments of just unabashed coolness, but they're interspersed with him being treated, like you say, like a cartoon character. Like he's never always on top, but it's also not, he has to be on bottom for such a long time and then he gets his moment in the sun. There is consistently no awareness of pride before a fall. And I love that about the character because one moment he's the best, like he's undefeatable. And the next he's got a fork on his ass. You know, it's just
I
getting
think
poked
there
in the
is.
eyes.
There's an armor there, or there's like a defanging of the actual events, not by he can take a L, but because of how little he cares about his own body. See, time and time again, he just lops off his hand and he laughs while he does it. In this one, he drinks boiling water to kill the little
Tummy
brownie.
mites. Yeah.
And it's stuff like that where it's like he doesn't care about his body. He's willing to do anything to survive. We kind of just all are allowed to laugh, so to speak, at the fact that like if he is hurt, it'll be fine.
Well, and
It's itchy and scratchy. It's Looney Tunes if the damage were taken seriously.
and
right, exactly.
the line in that moment as well is when he's just about to pour the kettle into his mouth. He's like, "Hey, little guy, how about some hot chocolate?" And I always thought that was interesting because, like, hot chocolate, to me, that's not like an Americanism. Like, you guys say cocoa.
No.
You know? So it's like, is the idea that this is hot chocolate on the stove? You know? Or is that the only line that made that joke work?
That is wild the more I think about it.
Right.
Because it's just not a phrase that we... I mean, it's a beverage. I've said the phrase I'll take like a hot chocolate. But
yeah,
like,
I don't know what you're talking about. I say hot chocolate all the time. That's what I call it, hot chocolate.
Well, you're Mr. International though, so.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say cocoa too, but like, I don't know. It's just a weird thing to say. I guess it's just probably because he didn't want to say take some hot water.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the factoid that I just see while I scroll through the trivia that explains a lot of this is the script was 43 pages. That's fascinating to me.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So they didn't write down all the bits. They were just
or
like, let's
maybe
just
they
do this
wrote
bit.
down the bit and then they just figured it out as it like shaped it. I don't know. Yeah.
Like he fights a skeleton is much different than, the skeleton's fists all coming out of the edges of frame. And
I only have one more joke
once.
that needs a shout out for childhood closure reasons, which is, are all men from the future loudmouth braggarts? Nope. Just me, baby. Just me.
Such a good line. That's a killer line, to be honest.
Yeah.
The delivery is just fantastic. I don't
also
know this,
the
but
arrogance. You're not the only loudmouth braggart on Earth.
No, absolutely.
You're really misrepresenting that.
Did Bruce Campbell actually go on to do anything else, though? And I don't mean that in like a
No, that's more
nasty
trivia.
way.
This is the first and last studio film Bruce Campbell starred in.
Why?
Yeah.
I don't know. He's great.
He got TV.
He's been on TV, semi-regularly, and I see him at conventions and shit. He's a really cool dude.
Wow.
He should get a comeback, a renaissance.
I mean, he's always been kind of around. He also like Bubba Hotep.
Yeah, Bubba Hotep was good.
And here's the problem is that all of his shit just kept getting canceled because like they almost found a tone like this in a television series, right? Adventures of Briscoe County Jr.
Yeah,
which was like
it was a
literally
sci-fi
at the same
cowboy
time.
thing. Yeah,
it was like a year after this. But I think he'll just be the Ash. He's just Ash.
that's true. That
baby.
was the show where it's like that could have launched his career, but it didn't, and he's out.
They just
yeah.
He's just one thing after another. It is a
but he was in
shame
Sam
'cause he's
Raimi's
a world-class
Hercules: The
talent.
Legendary Journey. He's in every Sam Raimi project.
Right, because they were
just as a tiny little bit because they
and that's
were
a
best
wild
pals.
thing. We talked about this before, just because we do the Coen Brothers show, but like him, Sam Raimi, and the Coen Brothers palling around at NYU, like thinking of jokes and movies and stuff like that, is just a wild picture that the universe has to offer.
Mhm.
Like, and you can kind of see it in all their work. Like, they're all have the same kind of joke brain. And they're just interested in slightly different things. You know, you have like the ultimate cartoonist in Sam Raimi, and like the kind of spastic.
It's got a Tex Avery vibe.
Yeah, but they all you can tell that they all understand how editing is so pivotal, and how it's used for comedy for sure. I love that shit.
Man, the fact that the villain's comeuppance is that he flies into the sky and explodes like Team Rocket from Pokemon. Again, it's just broader than I remembered. I remembered the cool factor being more present, and it's definitely comedy forward. Like its first blush is haha.
Yeah.
There's a Simpsons tier moment with an explosion just as the battle's beginning and the archers fire off their like explosive bows.
Yeah.
And it's just the perfect timing of this bow just lands in a shield and it's just like half a beat and just this ridiculous explosion that makes no sense given what's just happened. But
that's almost Monty Python. Yeah.
It's
there's some Python here for sure.
Those jokes from The Simpsons of just things just exploding from the least amount of contact or things setting on fire are truly, and I mean this with no hyperbole, will never not be funny to me. It's just the perfect joke. It's just so stupid. Like,
it's so dumb.
Milk on cereal, fire, or Chief Wiggum rolling into a tree and just explodes. Love it. That's the only thing you need to do.
Yeah. What else?
Maybe that will supplant Slapstick. There will be a whole movement of things explode easily.
Just exploding comedy. Yeah,
the film where everything explodes. A vampire and an explosion.
Bridget Fonda in this movie, which I always find insane. Like she's just in this she's the girlfriend of Ash at the beginning.
Yeah.
I also, the only other note that I really had is that the cinematographer of this movie shot The Matrix.
Nice. Does that mean they had a hand? He had a hand in inventing bullet time, presumably.
Oh yes, Bill Pope is often credited as the man who brought us bullet time.
Bullet time is a great
Scott
idea.
Pilgrim.
Yeah.
Bill Pope is like crazy well known as one of the most innovative cinematographers in the land. And he started his career with Raimi on Darkman.
Nice.
So it's crazy like how his career has gone nuts. And he's also worked with a lot of like different techniques. Like obviously you got like stop motion here mixing with live action. He worked on Team America World Police, so a lot of puppetry. He did all the Spider-Mans, the early versions. And yeah, he's just very cool. Very cool.
You could say he blew up after being impacted by a small thing.
Yes.
Well, I think you touched on it before, like this isn't a film where the script was this ludicrous thing and they kind of just hobbled together the actual production. Like the way it's shot, whilst I wouldn't say there's many shots where I'm like, oh wow, that's an amazing choice to do that. It's still done really well. Like Sam Raimi's signature close-up with a wide-angle lens. It's there throughohout, and I think sometimes you can take it for granted.
Zoom. He'll do a pump zoom while he dutches. I was like, that is a cool shot, man.
This is it. Like there's care and attention put into the filming, which almost
very much
belays how nonsense it is. And yeah, I just think it's, again, because there's so much other stuff going on, you don't necessarily give that the credit for itself. But it's like the way it's shot is really good. It really matters to keeping you engaged with it.
It's for a function, it's like that's the best stuff. That's why the high effort filmmaking only improves the comedy in my opinion. Now you can't obsess about small details that don't matter to the comedy, like that light looks really good or some shit like that. It's just like, it's mostly editing. It's mostly shooting for the edit and knowing what a funny frame looks like. And that's just taste. That's just Raimi and the team around him, right?
100%.
You want some? You want a piece? Just cut to.
It goes on for so long.
Well, my point is you gotta long frame that dude to make that work, and he always shoots it correctly. Yeah,
he always shoots
based on the logic of status or what's going on.
Exactly, it's simple,
and he shoots it with tons
maneuvers.
of flair. You always know Sam Raimi's style.
Yeah, he's highly stylistic.
Yeah,
he's the most of the people. I mean, he's very Edgar Wright-esque, but I don't know.
Definitely
there's like a circle
there.
of influence between Peter Jackson, Edgar Wright, and Sam Raimi, where you feel like they were working in the same space at slightly different times, but as they all have kind of made films, they all kind of influenced each other.
Yeah,
it's pretty wild.
They all sleep together in a big pile.
It's pretty cool. It's pile
funny.
I want to be in.
It's funny though, thinking about the critical reaction to Drag Me to Hell when that first came out, and maybe not so much. Sorry, not maybe the critical reaction, but the audience reaction of people really not vibing with the comedy aspect. And yet, when you watch Army of Darkness, to go to that, it's like it's the most sensible transition in the world.
Very comfortable.
But horror and comedy in that, like slapstick comedy, is just so. It's so niche that it's amazing, but amazing for such a select group of people.
I think you're right about that. Yeah.
Anyway, you can watch Kill Me Now, our horror movie, in its entirety on YouTube.
Thinking about that too. Yeah, for small budget.
It is a horror comedy.
Semi-slapstick. I mean, it's not really... Yeah, it is slapstick.
It's more dialogue-driven than slapstick.
But the killer will run around and being shitty. There's a lot of that.
There's the beer can to the head. That's slapstick.
But yeah, we didn't have enough of a budget to really blow it out as
Nothing
much as we wanted
explodes,
to.
yeah.
Because we really wanted him to... he gets peed on at one point. We just wanted these kids to magically thwart the real killer.
We did compare him to Wile E. Coyote a lot with the actor. That he incorporated some of that.
And yeah, which is great. But then also we had like no money, so it was the kind of situation where we like, all right, what's the best joke? We can do one, and that's unfortunate, but that's how it works. I'm sure there were jokes that fell on the floor at a room floor in this. It's always that.
But Raimi shows you the true path, which is always go for skeleton fingers poking your hero in the eyes. that's the move.
Or nose.
Or hooking his nose.
For you guys, being in the process that you are with making your own film, like, right. I just feel like whenever you guys watch a film, there's got to be things where you're consciously or subconsciously taking notes from it. And even something like this, where you go, here's how it succeeds with, limited resources or whatever restrictions. Like, is there anything from Army of Darkness you take and then go, oh, we can apply this to Papa Bear?
Man,
I took a sword out and fucked up a car. It was satisfying.
It was satisfying. Yeah, there's such different DNA.
Not really.
It's a stylistic genre like blend that is constantly doing Looney Tunes,
and they're having to accomplish period, which we get around by not doing that.
Right? Yeah. Well, so there's things that make that expensive.
I don't mean so much Army of Darkness, like what are the comparisons, but just watching it and then thinking about the filmmaking aspect, and then because you're in this zone of filmmaking, if there's something where you go, I'm motivated watching old school Sam Raimi, and now I'm doing my thing.
Sometimes the thing with that is I always think that filmmaking, it's like one problem at a time, right? So the concept of a Raimi cam, which is just if people don't know, camera tied down to a plywood board, so two dudes.
It's how they do the Nothing from Neverending Story.
Yeah, and it's a genius idea because it costs a plywood board and some rope, and that it was born out of necessity. It was born out of we have to find a cool way to show a demon traversing space. So you think of every problem as like, what's my thing? Well, you can make a movie cheap if you choose, I don't know, to shoot it all in one location, or scratch that, only have one character. There's ways in which you can really stretch it. And then if you make that go to work for you, one problem at a time, that's how you solve it. It's that spirit that Raimi has, that every cheap filmmaker, Robert Rodriguez as well, they all have wisdom, but when it comes down to it, you have to get your shot and make it cheap, and so that's sometimes an insurmountable task.
Cool.
You got an answer, Michael?
No, I don't. It's too different than our movie. The boring answer is I see no connection between them, and I don't think anything when I watch. I don't think anything about Papa Bear when I watch Army of Darkness.
But
I
other
just think
films,
Army of
there's
Darkness
other
stuff.
cheaply made
no,
films.
Nothing, Abe, nothing.
No, this is where it starts. This is where if Papa Bear breaks up. Is this podcast?
Well, I do think Papa Bear should probably chop his hand off now, but I don't think that comes from this. Cool. I think that I came up with that idea independently.
Yeah. It's your idea. It's no one else's.
At some point, Papa Bear has to say a single word line that will be synonymous with the brand here on out.
He's going to step on a nail and say, "My fair lady."
This is hail to the bear, my son.
Hail to the bear, my son. All right. Let's call it there. Hail to the bear.
This has been fantastic conversation. Is there anything you wish to plug?
Yeah, tell them a little more about the podcast you referenced. Give
Fabulous.
us the nutshell.
So I have a podcast network of 3 podcasts called I'm Glad You Exist. Michael was very gracious to be a guest on a recent episode, and we talk a lot about how Small Beans as a platform directly influenced me to even get into podcasting. So I wanted to leave this right to the end, but when I started I'm Glad You Exist, my ultimate goal was to be on Small Beans, and I never thought it would happen this quickly.
Oh, really?
So that's amazing. Yeah.
It happened fast, did it?
Well, I'm Glad You Exist is not a big podcast, and I've no qualms about presenting it as such. It's a labor of love. It's something I really enjoy doing. It allows me to connect with friends about their unique stories, and also I've been able to connect with a bunch of different people all over the world.
And you didn't ask. I asked you.
You did, yeah.
For the record.
That makes it extra
and
special.
I got to read your fantastic book. straight away, which was unbelievably exciting.
You talented Mr. Ripley'd us.
So the podcast is called I'm Glad You Exist. That's the name of the flagship show as well, which is an interview format. I also do a horror movie podcast called Crafting Chills with a co-host.
That's amazing.
Yeah. The horse doesn't really say much. It's quite distracting.
Yeah. He's a naysayer when,
Oh, boom. So those are the main two. I also have a podcast I do with my old manager called Breakwater Sausage, which is
all right, calm down.
Which is a podcast where we review full English breakfasts, but that is sporadic at best.
That's delightful.
I love a podcast where you hear the premise and you go, sure, whatever. Like, you can do that. The one where they watch Wild Hogs 2 every episode and discuss it. Fine, man. Do whatever you want. More power to you.
850 times in their lives or whatever.
So that's the podcast. But like I say, it's one of those where I think I've done 3 episodes this year, so don't subscribe to it thinking it's going to be weekly. I'd love to, but I do it as and when. But I did want to give one person a shout out, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Your mum, Michael.
Oh, hi, Mom.
She added me on Facebook after the episode you did on the show came
DMs.
Out.
Nice.
And she messages me every now and again. She's just the most lovely woman ever.
She's up there.
Congrats to her 19th anniversary.
One. She's a good egg.
She was great. Yeah.
Just
big love for her.
Moms are pretty great. Shout out to moms here at
I think we're going to do another
We love
Tales from
moms
the
here.
Pit with her soon, so you'll be hearing her voice on the network soon.
Fabulous. Can't wait. I do enjoy Tales from the Pit. I do feel like you probably need to be in a certain degree of sadness there, so I also hope that there's not too many Tales from the Pits if you're in a good place.
It depends on the angle. Abe and I are doing one. My partner and I have decided to start trying for kids. So we're doing one about, you don't have to be sad for that. You can just be anxious. That's still worth unpacking.
Oh, yeah. I think that's a glorious time for someone who wants to have
It's a different
kids,
kind
right?
of pit.
Ideally.
It's a spike pit.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's having me on because I'm like, I hate kids. No, that's not my.
That wasn't explicitly
position,
why, but yeah.
No, I mean, we have very different opinions about child rearing, and we'll get into that in the next Tales.
And their purpose in the human, in life and for the human species.
We're probably talking about legacy a lot.
Yeah.
We don't know what we're talking about yet.
I hear you though, because I'm getting married in a couple of weeks' time, and
Congrats.
thank you very much. Me and my partner are thinking we want to have kids next year. But there's absolutely this moral question of like, is the Earth overpopulated? Can we actually provide them a good life? Like, I never thought I'd have to think about that. So I think it sounds like an interesting episode.
Well, we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see.
Great.
Bunch of breeders over here. Well, thanks for being on, John.
Yeah.
No
This was
problem.
an absolute blast to talk about one of the goats of cinema with such a chill dude.
Cult
Thank you
classic.
so much.
The man in the
Is there
movie.
anything I want to talk about in the Small Beans world?
On the calendar.
Yeah, we have a
know.
Director Piece Theater is making a triumphant return. It wasn't really on hiatus. It just has been 6 weeks since the last episode. We got more one-ups in store after that. Coming up is Diablo 4.
Do you know what the
which is
topic
crazy.
of the director piece is?
Yeah, In the Cut.
In the cut.
It's an Adam-based one. It's a
Okay.
Meg Ryan movie, directed by Jane Campion, and it's like a neo-noir where she's like a femme fatale / private dick. So it's kind of a cool movie.
She
and
betrays
then
herself.
in 2 weeks, we'll have more Andersons for you. Inherent Vice by Paul Thomas Anderson. And that's all I needed to say.
That's all
Thank
she
you
wrote.
for listening to Frame
Yep.
Rate. We'll be back in about a month, and we'll probably do another one that we just want to do.
Oh, great.
Instead of
It's
turning
still
on the Pick
off.
the Flick
Okay,
tier.
great.
But we will tell you when we turn it back on so that the people who are engaged in this podcast and want to support us in a new level can do so. We'll tell you how.
Great.
Thanks again, everybody.
Bye-bye.